Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev, and welcome to this video, which is going to be a new JavaScript functions masterclass. So this is going to be all about JavaScript functions. The goal will be to get you really comfortable with what functions are, how you can use them, when to use them, how to name them, all sorts of really good stuff. So first off, we'll start off with our first file, which will be just syntax.js, which will go over just the syntax for functions. So first, let's just describe what a function is. Okay, so I like to create little headings in my files, so that way when you go look at my repo with all this code, it's all pretty easily readable. Okay, so functions. So basically functions, okay, what functions are basically a block of code. That's a pretty good definition right there. Thank you, GitHub Copilot. But they are a block of code that can be called anywhere in the program. So the idea is it's kind of like having code on speed dial. So instead of anytime you need to like do the same thing over and over again, instead of you writing that code over and over again, you can sort of say, hey, this label, this namespace is attached to a block of code. And then whenever I call that namespace, whenever I invoke that function, okay, run that code. Okay, so basically what it's going to do is it's going to run that code whenever the function is invoked or called by name. Okay, example. That was a good example right there. Okay, so like that. So basically you take the function name and then you put the parentheses after it, and that's you invoking or calling the function. Okay, so first, how do you create a function? Okay, creating a function. Okay, basically what we do is we use the word function, and that means we're declaring a new function. It's one way to declare a function. Okay, and we'll create a function that says, greeting. So that's the name of the function. Then when you put a parentheses after it, now what the role of the parentheses is, we'll get into deeper later on, but we're not using it right now, so we just have to put an empty parenthesis. Okay, and then we put a curly brackets that represents the code block. So basically I'm saying, hey, I'm creating a new function called greeting. We don't need the parentheses right now, so it's just empty. And whenever I call this function called greeting, it's going to run the code inside the code block as is. It's just going to run that code as it's written. Okay, so let's just do something simple. So I'm just going to console.log hello world. Okay. So this just declares the function, okay? This is not using the function. The function is not invoked or called when I create it, okay? But after I've declared the function, I can now use the function, okay? So now let's invoking the function, calling the function, using the function, okay? So that terminology is all the same thing. When I say call a function, call console.log, invoke console.log, I'm saying use the function. So in this case, we want to invoke greeting. So I take the name of the function that I just created, greeting. And right now it doesn't know what I want to do with this variable. I'm just literally putting a variable, a name, into the code. It's not until after I put the parentheses in, and this is not true for all languages, but for JavaScript this is very true, that it's by putting the parentheses after the label that represents the function that JavaScript knows, oh, I am calling or invoking the function, that I am using the function. Okay, so now if I open up a terminal to run this code, okay, so I'm going to do like node, so node syntax.js, that's the file we're working out of right now. See, hello world, cool. So basically it ran. You don't see any output for this because it's just creating the function. That's all happening in the ether. But then afterwards, I'm using the function. And the cool thing is, once the function's created, I can use it multiple times without me having to write all of this over again. So I can be like greeting. Cool. And see, now it prints out hello world 3 times. Now this has some benefits. Imagine that this code block was like 30 lines of code. That's 30 lines of code that I can run by just writing 1 line of code. Okay, so it makes it where I have to write less code to do the same thing over and over again, which plays into a programming principle called don't repeat yourself. Okay, the idea is we don't want to have to write the same stuff over again because that's more work, not just because I have to write it, But let's say I want to change what the code is doing. Instead of me having to change it every single time I write those 30 lines, I can just go to the function and just change it. So I can change it to like, good day. And by changing one line of code, I've changed every time that I use it. So see, now all 3 usages have changed to saying good day. Okay, so those are the initial sort of immediate benefits of functions. It allows me to create code that I can easily reuse, that's easy to maintain, meaning when I have to update it, I only have to update it in one place. Okay, so that's essentially what a function is. There are 2 other ways to write a function. Okay, so method 2, a function expression. Okay, now if I were to write the same function as a function expression, it would look like this. I would say const, and since we can't use the same name again, we'll say greeting2, okay, equals a function. Notice the way I'm writing this. Okay, instead of just this, I'm declaring a function called greeting. I am declaring a variable called greeting2, and what I'm storing inside of the variable is a function, because a function is a thing, like a number is a thing in JavaScript, or a string is a thing in JavaScript. It's a type of data we can store in a variable. Okay, so there are some under the hood differences, not like super practical differences. The big difference will be just sort of how the engine treats it. So for example, when I use this approach, whenever I run my script, JavaScript is going to scan the entire file for any function declarations that look like this and read those and create those functions before it runs any other code. This is referred to as hoisting, which may or may not be a good thing depending on the context. While since this is not a function declaration, I'm not declaring a new function, I'm declaring a variable. Variables aren't hoisted, meaning variables will just happen when they happen. So as the JavaScript engine is going line by line and reading and executing our code, this variable does not get created up front. It gets created when it gets to that line of code. Okay, so in this case, this function is not going to exist till it is needed. Okay, and there's going to be a lot of times where you might declare functions that may or may never be used. Okay, so in that case, you really don't want them existing till they need to exist. Okay, again, it's a nuance, not one that I really would spend too much time thinking about until you get much more granular, more advanced usage of these things. But there is a distinction. So again, the distinction here is I'm saying, hey, there's a new function. Here I'm saying there's a new variable, and inside that variable I am storing a function. And then otherwise this kind of works the same way. So I can just be like console.log, good day, and then I can call that function just like normal, because greeting2, even though it's a variable, inside the variable there's a function, and long as I put parentheses after it, it's going to assume that whatever name I put in there before the parentheses must be something that has a function inside of it, and will then call that function. Okay, there's some more implementation, like details of how this works behind the hood, that makes this make even more sense. But if you're new to functions, that probably won't make sense right now. So to keep it simple, just think about long as the name that comes before the parentheses has a function stored inside of it, then when I put the parentheses after the name, it's going to call the function. So again, if I call greeting2 3 times, see, and now I have the 3 good days from greeting1 and 3 good days from greeting2. But what happens if I put something that's not a function in the variable? So let's say, hey, const, I create a variable called not a function. It just equals the number 1. Okay? Now in the next line, let me try to call that variable, not a function. So there's the name, and then I put a parentheses after it. Now here's the problem. It's going to try to use this variable like a function, and when it goes inside and looks inside the cubbyhole and says, hey, what's inside this variable, and sees that there's not a function, it's going to throw me an error. So let's take a look at that so you can see that. Okay, so you see it did the good days, and then once it got to that line of code, see it says, hey, there's something wrong here. It says not a function, so this variable is not a function. Because see, when I put the parentheses after it, it's trying to use it like a function. Okay, so you always want to be sure that when you put the parentheses after any kind of label, that the label stores a function. Okay, so that's the only sort of thing I want to kind of point out there. Okay, so I'm just going to comment out those lines. And then the third way is an arrow function. And an arrow function is designed to be sort of really, really easy to write. Okay, so the full way to write so basically would create a variable, just like before, where you create greeting 3, except now instead of using the word function, an arrow function is always just parentheses, arrow, curly brackets. Okay, and then I can pretty much do everything on one line. So I can now write console.log, good day. There we go. And you see it's all in one line. It's the same deal, same parentheses. The parentheses does the same thing that the parentheses over here did. The only difference is that we remove the word function and we're replacing the word function with this arrow. So this arrow is kind of basically telling JavaScript that this is a function. And this is the parentheses that you saw up here. And these curly brackets are the same curly brackets you see up here. They're just in a slightly different order. Now, what's the benefit of this? The benefit of this is that the arrow function, one, is really easy to write in places where you don't want to write too many characters. So for example, I could choose to not use the curly brackets here because the arrow pretty much makes it obvious to the JavaScript engine that this is a function. So long as I'm only doing one command, there's only one thing after the arrow, or one JavaScript expression after the arrow, I could forego the curly brackets. Okay, so now that's just gotten simpler. Okay, and there's some other things you can do to make this more condensed, but otherwise, I'm just taking this function, so this is the function, and I am storing it in this variable, and again, just like before, I can just take the name of the variable, put the parentheses after it, and I can just keep calling it. Okay, now if I run this, now I have 9 good days. Okay, so they all work the same way. So at the end of the day, I'm just saying, hey, whatever code is in this function, anytime I use the function, run that code. Okay, so now let's talk about like that parentheses. Okay, because that's kind of like the next adventure when it comes to these functions. So that parentheses is where we put our parameters. Okay, so I'm going to make a file called parameters.js. Okay, so let's put a label on this file. Okay, parameters, no, not like that. Parameters and arguments for functions. Parameters are the names, are basically variables that we declare in a function. We're going to basically say, hey, this function is going to receive some inputs. We don't know what those inputs are up front. Like, we don't know. It's kind of like a recipe. I don't know how many people I'm making a recipe for up front, but I know there's a number. So that's like a variable that we're going to have to kind of keep in mind as we plan out our recipe. Well, an argument is us filling out those variables. They're like basically saying, hey, you know those placeholders, the number of people, the number of servings you need to make? Well, here's the actual number of servings you need to make. Okay? So let's just use that example. Okay, so for example, I'm going to create a function called a recipe. Okay, now the thing is that I don't know how many people I need to make this recipe for. So what we're going to do is we're going to have one placeholder for something that I don't know. Okay, and that's going to be servings. Okay, so let's say this recipe calls for, 2 eggs per serving. So we can say console.log. Okay, you need this many eggs. Okay, and then what we do is we'll just take the number of servings times 2 eggs, because it's 2 eggs per serving. Okay, and then we'll say you need this much ounces of milk. Console.log. It's like almost, it can like hear my thoughts. That's insane. Okay, and we'll say 2 cups of milk per serving. So that's what this function does. So again, servings is just a variable that we don't know yet. So the idea is you want to write this code. There's just certain things you don't know yet. Okay, so now what I can do is I can call recipe and say, hey, I'm going to cook this recipe for 2 people. Okay, now if I run this code, node parameters.js, you can see here, look, I need this many eggs. It says I need 4 eggs because servings, so this 2, this is the argument. So 2 is the argument. So the first argument gets saved into the first parameter. So 2, when this function is being called, gets saved into the servings parameter. And now anywhere I use servings in my code block gets replaced with the number 2. Okay, so now it's 2 times 2, 2 times 2. And again, that goes for every time I use the function. So now if I want to do that same recipe for 4 people, okay, even though I type in recipe, not sure what a recipe is, but it sounds like it should be a word. Okay. Okay, and then see, when I use it the second time, it's going to give me back 8 and 8. And this is where functions start really becoming useful, because not only can I have the same code with the same logic run multiple times, but if there's parts that may change every time I use it, I can account for that using parameters. I can create placeholders to replace the things that I don't know yet, but I know I will know when I need to use this code block. Okay, so I know that servings are a thing I don't know yet, and I know how servings relates to the things that I do know, so I can express the code and say, okay, well, later on when you tell me how many servings they are, this is how you come up with that final result. So again, parameters are these, and again, you can have multiple parameters. Okay, so you can sit there and say, hey, servings, you know, and we'll say, let's see here, what's a good, we'll say days, okay? Because maybe you want to cook so many servings for so many days, okay? So now what you do, we multiply that by days. Okay, so basically that way you have enough, that number of many of servings for each day that you plan on having this recipe for. So now what happens is I need now, watch what happens when I don't put in a second number. Okay, I get errors. Okay, why? Because since I didn't put in a second argument, days didn't get anything. So 2 got stored into servings, but there was nothing to put into days, so days is undefined. Okay. Oh, no, so I'm missing it. I have some extra tokens here, so let me clean that up. Let me run that over again. Okay, and see, I get nan. The reason being is that when we take servings, which was 2 times 2, that's 4, and then 4 times days, which is undefined, is not a number. Like, we don't know what that is because undefined is not a numerical value. So the point I want to make here is that if you don't pass an argument, if I don't pass in a second number for days, so we'll say for 4 days, okay, and for here we'll say for 5 days. If I don't pass in the second number to go inside the second, if I don't pass in a second argument to fill the second parameter, then it's going to be undefined. Okay, so it's not like every parameter will have a value. If you don't give it one, it will be undefined. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay, and I can pass in extra arguments, they just won't do anything. So I could pass in a third number, 6. Okay, but because there's no third argument, there's no third variable or container to catch that third value, it just exists and disappears into the ether. Like it's just a waste of keystrokes. But it doesn't break it. Okay. So now if I run that, see, now it works, okay? Because, if we take 2 is the servings, 4 is the days, and 6 is nothing. Again, we don't have a third argument. We don't have a third parameter to receive that third argument, so it's just useless. But 2 times 2 is 4, and then 4 times 4 is 16, so we get 16 eggs and 16 cups of milk. So that's how parameters and arguments work. Any value can be passed in as an argument, okay? We'll see that in examples. So I can pass in not just numbers and strings, but I could also pass in objects, I can pass in arrays, I can pass in other functions as an argument, I can pass in classes as an argument. Literally anything that is a value in JavaScript can be passed as an argument to fill in one of those parameters and can then be used by your code. Okay, so next thing we need to talk about is return values. Okay. Function return values. Okay, and again, the return value, let's define it. The value that is returned from the function. I don't like that definition to say the value, the single value a function gives back to the caller. I like that, this definition. So it is when I call the function, I can have as much code running in that code block. But at the end, always at the end, because the minute the function returns a value, it stops. So even if there's code after the return, it'll just ignore that code. But when the function is done, it's going to give me something back, or it can. Again, if I never return a value, the function gives me back undefined. Okay? So let's create a function that, let's say, we add numbers, and it's going to return us the value of two numbers being added. Okay? So we're going to create a function. So we'll say function add nums, and it's going to take in two numbers. So number 1 and number 2. And now the difference here, before I've been console logging everything. So now I'm going to use the word return. This means that take whatever is after the word return. So this return keyword means this is what the function gives back. Okay? And give me back this, give me back the result of this. So it's going to give me back the result of num1 and num2. Add it together. Okay, now I'll put a console log after it, just to kind of demonstrate something. Cheese. Now notice it's dimmed. Okay, so Visual Studio Code, it can tell when certain code will never be run, like it's just impossible for that code to ever be accessible, and it will dim it. Okay, if the code is unused, like an unused variable, or if the code is somewhere it cannot be accessed, it dims it. This is oftentimes a good hint that you might have made a mistake somewhere. Because if you expect that code to run and it's dimmed, go back and take a look at your code. In this case, since the return, my line returning a value is up here, the function is going to stop there. It's not going to go any further, so this line of code will never run. And I'll show you that. So let's actually call the function. Okay, so I'm going to say add nums, and I'm going to add the numbers 1 and 2. So now if I run this code, so we'll say node return.js. It didn't give me back anything at all. Okay, why didn't I see anything? Okay, because isn't it supposed to return number 1 and number 2? Yes, but it actually did return the result of 1 plus 2. But here's the thing, just because it returns a value doesn't mean I see that value in my console, in my terminal. That's the role of console log. Log is for me to show things. Okay, the return value is just to say, hey, this function is giving me back something. So in order to capture that thing, I need to declare a variable to capture that return value. Okay, so this result, this return value is popping out of the function, and I need to catch it. Okay, how do I do that? I'll declare a variable. So we'll call it result. It doesn't matter what you call it. And we're going to say that result, this new variable result, is going to equal whatever the result of this function call is. Okay, so we know that this function is going to return the result of num1 plus num2. So it's going to say, hey, 1 plus 2. So what's being run? The number 3 is returned. So it's going to store the number 3 in this variable. And if I console log it, so if I go console.log, we'll say result. So that way it's a nice pretty print. Okay. Okay. And you see the result is 3. So you see like the return value is, because a lot of people get console logging a variable confused with returning a value. Okay. When you return a value, the function is going to give you a value that you can actually use in your code. Well, if you console log it, it doesn't. So for example, if I change this code, so if I change this instead of return num1 plus num2 and I say console.log, num1 and num2, let's see what happens. And then we'll console log this block here. We'll comment that out. So if I run this now, watch what happens. We still see the number 3 because we're console logging the result of num1, num2. But now the function doesn't return a value. So when I create this result variable to capture the return value, since there isn't any, when you don't define a return value, the returned value is undefined. So then when we console log the result, what's inside the result? Undefined. There was nothing for this variable to catch because this function doesn't return a value. Okay? So the idea is the return value is what you would capture if you assign the result of that function to a variable. Like what would get stored in that variable. Okay? So now there's no way for me to take that number and use it for something else. Because usually what I could do is I could store that 3 in this variable and then maybe use it for other calculations or pass it to other functions. That's the reason you return a value, because you want to take what happened in the function and bring it out to use in other places. Okay? So for example, let's go back, let's change this back to return. So I'm just going to comment out this line. Okay. Let's say return num1 plus 2. Let's do something a little bit more interesting. So, and here's the cool thing. You can pass the return value to other functions. So watch if I do this. Add nums. And the first argument is going to be another call to add nums with 1 and 1. And then the second argument is going to be add nums 2 and 2. So when you look at this, this looks like a lot going on. The way you got to think about it is that it's going to, when you think about it step by step, the first thing it's going to do is always go inside the innermost parentheses. Okay, so what it's going to do is it's going to first run this. So essentially what's going on in the parentheses is first going to turn into this. Add nums. And then it's going to turn this into 2, because add nums 1 on 1 is 2. But we still have this add nums over here. So you see it's like first it's going to do 1 at a time. So it resolves this call to the function. It says, okay, let's do that add nums first. Okay, so now basically what we have is this. Now let's do that second inner add nums. Okay. So in this case, it's going to be add nums 2 and 4, because this add nums 2 plus 2 is going to return 4. So you see the return values are what ends up getting passed as the argument to add nums. So then when add nums return, that add nums plays out and returns a value, what it's going to return is 6. Okay, so that's the steps of how like the JavaScript engine is going to evaluate this. It's going to start from the innermost parentheses, this red parentheses, evaluate these two function calls, and replace them with their return values. Then it's going to take this function call, replace this with its return value, and then we'll pass that return value to the function of console log, which then prints it to the terminal. So now let's see if I'm right. If I'm right, this is what you should see getting console log, 6. And that's what you see, 6. Okay, so key thing to remember there is that, again, a return value is the thing that the function gives back, so that way you can save it in a variable or pass it to another function, like I did there. Yeah, so that's how return values work. Okay. Now, basically, 90% of the things you'll be doing with functions can be done with what we've just learned. Okay, that gives you all the basic building blocks of being able to pass the data into a function with parameters and arguments, and being able to get data out of a function using its return value. And you can create a lot of functions to do lots of things with it. Now, common patterns is you're going to create functions to either get you values, to change values, or to create things, or to check whether things are true or false. Now, generally, one thing you want to be really good at is having functions that kind of do a very clear thing and giving it a name that does that thing. So, for example, we're going to create a file called names.js because we're going to talk about function naming. So the theory here is that we want to start working with objects that represent people. Okay, so, and we're not going to use classes. We're going to pretend classes are off the table as far as doing this. We're going to create just a purely functional way of doing this. So first I need a function to create a person object. Okay, so generally when you prefix it with the word create, okay, the implication is that it's going to return an object with a certain type of data. So in this case, I would create a function. We'll call it create person. And what are the things we're going to define? These are fine. Okay, first name, last name, gender. Okay, so basically what this function is going to do is going to return an object that has those properties set. So that's exactly what it is. So you see this function is returning an object, because you can return anything. You can return only one thing, but you can return an array, you can return an object, you can return a number, you can return a string, but you can only return one thing. So in this case, what we're returning is the object, and inside the object there are several properties. And again, I'm assuming that you've already learned about objects and properties if you're watching in this video. This is not an initial, hey, my first JavaScript video. Okay, so in this case, we're returning an object that has these properties. Okay, awesome. So let's test to see if that works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a person, me. Okay, and I'm going to use this create person function. Okay, that's not my information, so we'll fill with my information. I am Alex, but my last name is Merced. Okay, and my age is no longer 23, it's 38 now, time flies by. And my gender is male. There we go. Okay, cool. So see, that function's really clear what it's going to do. So if I were to then console log this variable, Alex, just based on the name of the function alone, I can probably assume that, hey, this is going to create me a person object, an object that represents a person. And if I log the result, I save the result in a variable and log it, that it should, get me that person. So let's take a look. If I run that, so we'll say names, node names.js, and you see it logged an object. And we can tell it's an object because it has the curly brackets around the data. Okay, awesome. Okay, so now I want to create functions that allow me to work with that object. Okay, so we're going to say, hey, we're going to create a function to get the values from the object. Okay, and I know I can already access those properties using dot notation, but the purpose of this exercise is to learn how to name functions and how to think of what a function can do for you. Like, you want to think about what is the intent of a function that I'm writing and name it accurately. So in this case, like, let's say I want to say function, and I want to use a function to get the whole name. Okay, so call it get full name. Okay, what you'll do is we'll pass in the person object. So that's going to be, we're going to pass in a parameter to where we can pass in that object. And then that way the function has the object, and then we're just going to return the person's first name plus a space, because you want a space between the first name and last name. And basically we're just adding their first name and last name together. So you notice all the function does is get you a very particular piece of information. That's all it does. And the name of that function is very clear on what that piece of information is. So again, if someone else were using the function you created, they can easily understand what your intention is here and kind of how to use it. So in this case, if I were to say get full name Alex, see, it logs my name, Alex Merced. Okay, so generally some functions fall in the category of they're fetching you a particular piece of information. Generally, the name should be prefixed with get. Okay, not fetch, not other words. You want to try to stick to sort of a standard playbook, a playbook that most programmers play with. So when I'm creating a new object, create is a good prefix. When I'm fetching a piece of information, get is a good prefix. Now, what if I wanted to change the information? Okay, so let's say I wanted to do something like change the age. Okay, function to set the age. Okay, we can create a function, and usually you would do it, you prefix it with the word set. So I'm going to say set age. Okay, and then what we'll do is we need to pass in which person we want to update. So the first argument is going to be the person we want to update, and then the second argument is going to be the new age we want. Okay, and basically what it'll do, it'll just return a string that says age set. Okay, so it's not really returning anything useful. It's just changing the object and then returning a confirmation that happened or something. Okay. Cool. So now in this case, let's change the object. So I'm not going to even console log the return value because we don't care about the return value. I'm just going to say console log. We want to change Alex's age. Let's say next year I turn 39. Okay. And then let's console log Alex to make sure that the change actually happened. Okay. So this function changes. This is what's referred to as a setter. Okay. In this case, it's not a method of the object, a function built into the object. It's just a standalone function. But basically, I'm saying, hey, I'm gonna update this object because that's gonna be that's the person argument, and then I'm gonna change that person's age to that age. So then see, it then makes that change right there. So let's see if it works. Okay, and you can see like in the first console log when we first created the object, I was 38, but then after the set age, my age changed to 39. Okay, but you see the function's name is very clear as to what the purpose of the function is. Okay. Now, the last thing you'll see is like a lot of times you might write functions that test whether something is true or false. Generally, the prefix there is. So for example, let's say maybe we want to create a function that checks if someone is of drinking age, which is generally 21 in the United States. Okay. For, for true, false, prefix function names with is. So for example, I'll say function is drinking age. And then we pass in the person. And what it's going to return is whether the person's greater or equal to 21. Okay, so that's going to return true or false. So in that case, we can pass in, we can say console.log, the result is drinking age Alex. And again, I just by that prefix alone, just by that word is, as an experienced programmer, I know that this function is going to return me true or false, because that's the standard. That's just generally what you expect as a programmer, that if a function's name starts with the word is, you're asking a question, a yes or no question. So you're going to get back true or false. So I can use that for like if statements or something like that. So I can be like, okay, is Alex of drinking age? We can console log it so you can see that it is going to return true. But I can use that for if statements. So I can be like, if is drinking age Alex, and then I can say if that's true, okay, console log drinking age, otherwise not drinking age. Okay, so notice I can now use this function to more easily, quickly declare my if statements. And when you read my code, it's much easier for you to see this and know exactly what I'm asking. So oftentimes taking your Boolean expressions and wrapping them in functions with names can make your code more readable, because then when I read your code, I don't need to sit there and look at all these like if equal greater than this. You just have a function name that makes it very clear this is what you're evaluating in this if statement. So I know, okay, hey, you're asking, is Alex of drinking age? Even if I don't know the exact code of that function, like the exact implementation, I know what you're trying to do. Okay, and good code, I should be able to just read through your code and have a pretty decent idea what you're trying to do, because you're giving me good variable name function names that are clear as to what they are. So like, Alex represents Alex, and is drinking age is going to check the drinking age. So if I see is drinking age Alex, you are asking me, what is it? Is Alex the drinking age? Like it's fair. You can almost read it like a sentence. And you can see like when we console log the result of the function, it did return true. And you can see that when we run it through the if statement, I'm of drinking age, not that I drink. Okay. So again, using those prefixes when you name your functions will force you to write better functions, because you'll be thinking about what the purpose of your function is. If you really put some thought into the name and try to use these names, it'll also force you to make less, because what a lot of people do is they'll try to create these really complex functions that have like 40, 50 lines of code, because they just want to do it all in one function. Ideally, you want to do things in many functions. So you want to think about all the things you do and break them into those little steps, and then create a function with the proper name. So that way, everything sort of like reads in a sensible way. Okay, so that's the deal there. Okay, a couple more little topics. Here we're going to talk about variable arguments. So what if you don't know how many arguments you need? Okay, so let's say you just want to say, hey, I want to add up all the numbers you give me. Okay, I want to create a function that just adds everything. Okay, there's two ways you can do this. Okay, if you're using the function keyword, okay, what you can do is I can define no arguments. I don't even have to. Built into JavaScript is a thing called arguments. Okay, you never have to declare it. It just exists. I'm going to recommend that you don't use this. I'll give you a better alternative that's more easy to read, but just be aware that this exists. So now watch what happens if I use that function. So if I say add all, like a whole bunch of numbers, like that, and then I run this, so node var args. Okay, so I get this arguments object, and you see like there's a key for each value. Okay, that's cool. Okay, I can then work with it, so I can do something like this. I can say, okay, hey, let me create a variable. So we'll say let result equals 0. And then I'm going to say, hey, for let arg of arguments. Okay, because I can loop arguments as a iterable or loopable object, so I can use a for of loop on it. And then I can just say, result plus equals the argument. And then we'll just return the result. Okay. Let me actually save the result in a variable. Let result equal here. And then let's console.log the result. Okay. And now it's going to, basically what it's doing is taking 0 and it's going to loop through each number. It doesn't matter how many, and the thing is that I never declared any arguments. because this arguments object is just a list or this iterable object of all my arguments. It's not my favorite way of doing this. It's the way it was originally built in the JavaScript, and it works. Okay, so if you want to build these functions that just kind of loop over all the arguments and work with them based on that, like, you can do that. I could do the same thing using a feature in JavaScript called destruction, which came along later. One of my favorite features in JavaScript, and allows you to kind of name things. And instead of working with this weird arguments object, you can just work with a standard array. So the way this would work is we'll say function add all to. But now I do declare an argument. So what you do is that if you want basically think of your arguments as an array. So if I were to create different names, so we'll say like, argument 1, argument 2, but let's say there's going to be more arguments and I don't know how many more, and I want to just put the rest of them in an array, I could do ... remaining arguments. And if you watch, like if I were to do this, console.log 1, 2 remaining args. Okay, so let's actually call that function. Add all. There we go, with a bunch of numbers, just like before. You see here, 1, that first argument got stored in the parameter of 1. The second argument got stored in the parameter of 2. And then all the remaining arguments got put into an array. So this is referred to as the rest operator. It takes the rest of the arguments and stores them in an array for you. Okay, nice. So a common pattern is, if maybe you want to do what we just did above, I will just take this whole thing, and I just want all the arguments in one array, which we'll call args. Because again, you get to choose a name. Whatever the name is after the 3 dots is the name of the parameter. So in this case, now I can just do what we did before. And the cool thing is, now I can use, since it's an array, it has the availability of all the array methods that are built in the JavaScript. So now I can do like return args dot exactly this, reduce, and then I can just do the addition using the reduce function, and I can do it all in one line instead of having to like loop over it. And again, that's if I have a whole video on the reduce function, so I'm not going to get too deep into how the reduce function works right now. Watch my array methods videos for that. But see, now I have access to all my array methods, which makes life easier. So now if I run this, okay, well, let me actually save the result of this in a second variable, equals, and then let's console.log result2. You can see the second set of arguments added up to 45. This one added up to 46. Okay, so in that sense, I can have as many arguments as I want coming in because I can just use that approach. That's one way to do it. Another way you can do it is, instead of using the rest operator, what I could do is I could just pass an array to begin with. Okay, so let's create add all 3. Function add all 3. Okay, and this time what we're going to do is we're just going to put, my first argument will be just called r. Okay, so instead of me taking all the arguments and turning them into the array, I'm asking for an array up front. I'm telling the user in the documentation for the function, like, I don't want you to give me each argument one by one. I want you to give it all to me prepackaged as an array. I'm going to assume that you're going to do that. So it's essentially the same argument. I'm going to take that array and reduce it, except now when I call the function, okay, notice this time I'm going to pass the arguments already as an array. Because again, anything can be passed in as an argument. Okay, so in this case, this ends up in the same place. So I return result, const result3 equals. Okay, then console.log result3. Okay, and you see I get 45. So same way for me to handle multiple arguments. So I can take in an array of arguments. Also, another cool thing is if you want to have the ability to like give your different arguments names, a very nice pattern is what you'll do is you'll take an object as an argument. Okay, so maybe I'll do something like this. I'll say function calculator. Okay, and then basically what I'm expecting is that you're going to be passing me in an object with a bunch of options. Okay, and basically what I want to do is make sure, what I want you to do is basically do an operation where the operation is based on basically three properties: num1, num2, and operation. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to destructure those properties. So I'm going to say const using object destructuring. Okay. If you're not familiar with object destructuring, watch my video on destructuring. Okay. So basically what I'm doing is I'm taking the object that was passed in and I'm going to bust out those properties. Okay. And I'm going to just give them some default values. So by just doing this, I'm giving it a default value, which prevents it from like erroring out, because if I forget to pass something in. So we'll say, hey, if you didn't pass in a num1, if you didn't pass in a num2, and you didn't pass in an operation, that'll by default be add. We'll do that. Okay. And then what we'll do is we'll create a switch statement. Okay. And that switch statement will be take the operation that we just declared on the previous line. Okay. And let me see if it'll do it for me. Yay, thank you. And then based on what you passed in as the operation, it'll return num1, num2. Okay? So the nice thing about this is I don't have to worry about the order that they put it in there. So watch if I do this. Like if I now use this function and I did like console.log calculator. So in this case, see, I created an object and the object has three properties: num1, num2, and operation. And you see I'm assuming that that object passes the first argument, and I'm using it. Okay. And by destructuring it, I'm able to put default values as a backstop in case you didn't define those properties. Okay. So I do that, but again, I don't have to do them in the right order. Like there's no right order because it's an object, as long as they have the right name. So I can do calculator, and let me just change this one up a little bit. Instead of putting operation last, I could put operation first. Okay, so that's a nice thing because now the different arguments now essentially have a name. As long as I pass in the right properties with the right names, it doesn't matter what order I pass in those properties, this is going to work. Okay, which is why like passing in arguments, using options as arguments is becoming a more and more popular thing. So you see here, we took 1 plus 2 because, we said if we wanted to add num1 and num2, so it added them 3. And then here, we took 1 minus 2 because it's 1 and 2. 1 minus 2, we chose subtract, so we got a negative 1. And the cool thing about this is it makes the function easy to update. So later on, let's say you wanted to add some additional functionality to the function. Okay, you don't have to add an additional argument. You can just add an additional key. Okay. So, like, if I wanted to put something like, assume 0, let's say, and then I can make, we'll say that defaults to, I don't know, it's not putting that in the wrong place. I can put something like assume 0 as a property, which could be, something that may assume 0 if there's no argument passed in or something like that. Or I can change what the default is. So I can say, hey, like default num, and then we'll say default num equals 0 if it's not specified. But now I can do something like this: console.log calculator. And actually, let me just change one other thing over here. Default num. Actually, the way I would want to do that is probably like this. I have to do this on 2 lines. Const default num. The reason being is I want to declare that default num variable before I declare num1 and num2. We'll say it equals 0, and then I'm going to just declare that equals options. So I pull that property out. So that way, default num becomes the default value for num1 and num2. Okay, so basically what it'll do is it'll check to see if I set a default num in the options object, and then it'll use that instead of 0. But if I don't define default num, it's just going to assume 0, and then that'll become the default value for num1 and num2. Okay, so now I could do something like this, where I say, okay, I don't define, I just do an operation. So we're going to say add. And then we'll say default num is 10. And I won't define num1 and num2 in that case. So in that case, it should give me back 20, because since I didn't give it a num1, it's going to assume the default num of 10 because of the way I wrote the logic. But notice, the point isn't the logic. The point is that I was able to add an additional possible argument without forcing you to change the way you've used it in the past. Okay, so basically by having an object as the way you deliver data to the function, if you need to add properties, it doesn't disrupt previous usage of the function. So it makes it the function much more maintainable and flexible for future changes. Because adding keys doesn't affect the order that you have to do things, which is really nice. Okay, but like let's say if I do that, I should get back 20, and I got back 20. Okay, again, if that started getting a little convoluted there, like again, the point wasn't the logic, the point of how easy it was for me to add that additional argument without it affecting the way I had to use the function in the previous 2 times I called it. That's sort of the benefit of using options as a argument to a function, because now that object can contain infinite properties, and that can just basically, it can be flexible in the order that those properties are defined, whether those properties are defined at all. I have a lot of flexibility there to kind of make a function that's robust and flexible. Cool. Okay, and the same thing goes for like return values. Okay, so we're almost done. Multi-returns.js. Okay, so we can have multiple return values. I thought you said I can only return one thing. You can. Well, what if the one thing you return is an array? Okay, or what if the one thing you return is an object? Okay, so for example, I can say, we'll say function calculations. Okay, and what you do is you're going to just give it 2 numbers, num1 and num2. And what it's going to do is that it's going to return you an object. So instead of you returning just like the result of add, what if I wanted the result of all operations? So I can just be like, okay, the result of add is num1 plus 2, and so it kind of knows what I want to do. So I'll just let it do it. And so now I have multiple return values. Okay, it's still only returning one object, but the one object contains multiple pieces of information. So now if I were to say console.log calculations 10 and 20, let's see what gets logged out. Node names. Node multi-returns. Okay, and you can see now I get this object that has all the calculations, and I can use the one that I want. Okay, imagine that there's a scenario where you need to have all the possible calculations handily and maybe pre-computed for some reason, because you're building a cache or something. Okay, but the idea is I can store multiple values in an object. Okay, I could also have done this as an array. So we'll say function calculations2. Okay, num1, num2. The only difference is that we return it as an array. Okay, and see, I'm doing the same thing. I'm taking all the results. The only difference with this is there's no label, so I have to know that the first thing in the array is always the addition result. The second thing in the array is the subtraction result. The third thing in the array is multiplication result. But I'm still returning multiple values. In certain situations, one might be better than the other. Okay, depending on sort of like, do I need to loop over those things that I get back? I might prefer an array. But if I want to give clear labels to the things, then I might prefer an object. But it allows me to ship more than one thing out of the function. Okay, so if you ever need more than one thing coming out, these would be the ways you would do it. You could either package those multiple things as an array or an object. So you can package multiple things going in as an array and object as per like the multiple arguments. And then you can package things going out as arrays or objects to get multiple things going out of the function. Okay, there's a lot more you can do with functions. I have plenty of other videos. I will look up videos on callbacks and lots of other things. But this should keep you pretty busy, especially just kind of really getting a hang of naming your functions and creating functions that have very clear purposes and then being able to, instead of making one really complicated function, breaking it down to a bunch of smaller functions with very clearly defined jobs, and then using those functions together. Okay. So yeah, there you go. Those are a lot of the techniques you can use in JavaScript functions. Let's see, what am I doing on time? Okay, I got 5 more minutes before we hit an hour on this video, so let me just go over one more thing. Function composition. So I mentioned like making a lot of functions that can be used together. Okay, I want to show you just sort of like the wrong way to do it versus the good way to do it. So let's say what I want to do is I want to add, then subtract, then delete, or I mean then divide. Okay, I could do something like this. Okay, so I'll create like, you know, I'll use arrow functions to make this simpler. I could say first I want to add, so that'll just equal num1 plus num2. Okay, and then what I'm going to do, and then notice I didn't put curly brackets here. So notice I didn't use the keyword return. With arrow functions, if you don't use curly brackets after the arrow, whatever's after the arrow is the return value. Okay, keep that in mind. If I put curly brackets, then I have to use the word return. Okay, just making a note of that, because a lot of times people don't realize that that's a distinction, and they forget to put the return keyword if they add the curly brackets, or they try to use the return keyword without the curly brackets and get an error. Okay, so no curly brackets after the arrow, don't need the word return. It's automatic. If you do put the curly brackets, then you need to use the word return to return a value. Okay, and then I could say like const subtract, except what I do here is I say I'm going to subtract the result of adds num1 of add num1 num2 and then subtract that from num2. Okay. So let me just think about that. Okay, and then const divide, and so you get this. And then the problem with this is that each function depends on the other function's existence. So divide only works assuming subtract and add exist, because divide needs subtract and subtract needs add. Okay. Again, the logic may not play one for one when I do the two different versions, but the idea of how they're constructed should. Okay, so basically if I do this, console log divide 10 by 2, let's see what I get as a result. And this should be composition. I get 5. How I got there, not the point. But the point is, like, let's say I get rid of add. Let's say I get rid of add for this to all play out. This is no longer going to work. See, now I get an error, because even though divide exists and all I called was divide depended on subtract, and subtract depended on add. Add didn't exist anymore, and now you have a problem. Okay, so imagine, so the idea is you want to write your code in a way where like each individual piece is not as dependent on every other piece as possible. Okay, because again, what if one piece disappears? You don't want the whole thing to fall apart. So the way you should do it is you want to just kind of write these as 3 separate functions. Okay, so you use something like const add, which is just going to add, see, purely doesn't depend on another function. Const subtract, okay, which is going to equal num1 num2 as my arguments, and then the result, we're going to return num1 minus num2, and then const divide equals that, and then what I do is I just compose them together. So I'm going to say, hey, I want to add first. Okay, so again, everything always starts from the innermost parentheses. So generally when I'm using a bunch of functions on each other, the first one I should call is the one I want to happen last. So in this case, if I were to do console.log, the last thing I want to do is divide. Okay, so we're going to start with divide, and then this is exactly what you're going to get. So I'm going to take the and then basically this is going to, so basically what it does, it starts from the inside first. Okay, am I missing? Yeah, I'm missing one parentheses. So essentially the way it's going to resolve this is first it's going to be like divide, subtract. The add gets resolved first, so that add 10 and 2 becomes 12. So that subtract becomes 12, 2. Okay, so you see like it resolved the add, and then we resolve the subtract, so that becomes subtract 12 minus 2 is 10, so it becomes divide 10, 2, and then that's going to become 10 minus 2, 10 divided by 2, 5. Okay, so you see it starts from the inside. Again, the way it reads functions is from the inside out. So if I know that, I can just easily read this and kind of get an idea what's going on. I'm adding, I'm subtracting, then dividing. Okay, but the beauty is that these functions aren't dependent on each other. I can, one, reuse them in situations that have nothing to do with each other because they have nothing to do with each other. Divide has nothing to do with subtract and nothing to do with add. So these are really good functions because they do something simple. They do a very clearly defined task. That clearly defined task is very clearly described by the name of the function, and it doesn't necessarily depend on the existence of other functions to complete its work. Okay, so typically, instead of using functions in other functions, you're better off taking the return value of one function and passing it to another function and thinking of them like steps, like an assembly line, where something goes in the first function, gets returned, then the next function receives that as an argument, returns when they're done with their job, and so forth and so forth. And think of it as like an assembly line instead of having a bunch of functions inside of functions. So again, this is just part of the art and the skills you can develop over time. As you write more and more functions, you'll develop this sense of sort of what are sort of the best, most robust ways of writing these things. Main thing right now is just write ones that work. But my name is Alex Merced from AlexMercedCoder.dev. Have a great day and enjoy.